President Trump has reportedly admitted privately that he thinks Ukraine's attack on Russia's bombers was pretty badass. But is that not a substitute for him actually doing anything, as he continues to make believe that Putin is just a misunderstood friend? Plus, we're going to talk about the state of Russia's private sector is, well, more bad news for private sector companies. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's get into it. Okay, so this is according to Axios, who has reported that Trump privately referred to Ukraine's strike by using FPV drones to take out very expensive strategic bombers as pretty badass and strong, right? Which, if you're someone like Trump, strong is basically the highest compliment you can receive, to the extent he's, well, capable of complimenting anyone else. Right? You might note that he thinks Vladimir Putin is a great guy because he is so strong. Now, of course, the numbers, right, ever rising. They're now estimating about $7 billion in damage as more and more satellite photos reveal just how badly damaged some of these aircraft are. In fact, there's been at least 4 of these strategic bombers that have been burned to complete ash. So really a increasingly embarrassing move for Russia. And not only are these bombers used to launch cruise missiles at Ukraine, but remember, these are one of the 3 legs of the Russian nuclear triad, the 3 ways that they can ensure that their strategic nuclear arsenal, the one that's used for mutually assured destruction, right? That one of those 3 legs has now been removed from the stool, or at least been greatly diminished. Because remember, if you are a nuclear power, you rely for your safety on mutually assured destruction. Your nuclear arsenal is pointed directly at your opponent's nuclear arsenal and always on a hair trigger, which says that if you try to use your nuclear weapons to wipe my country off the face of the earth before they can hit, we are going to detect that launch and we are going to fire our own arsenal at yours, ensuring that both of us can mutually self-destruct. But that only works if you ensure a diverse range of ways those nuclear weapons can go. Because let's say the United States developed a special bunker buster nuke that says all Russia's nukes in silos are rendered ineffective. Russia still has enough ballistic nuclear missile submarines under the sea and enough strategic bombers that can get airborne to ensure that even if one of those legs was to get removed, it would be able to complete that deterrent strike. All right, it would have a deterrent capacity. Well, without aircraft, now it only has 2 deterrent options, which doesn't look that good. You might say to yourself, but Paul, Ukraine only took out about 1/3 of Russia's bomber fleet, and this is true. But what's crucial to remember is that bombers cannot maintain a state of constant readiness forever, right? Aircraft need to be refitted, refueled. They need regular maintenance, especially if they're stationed in the Arctic Circle, as these ones were. So when you take out 1/3 of that, the bomber fleet, you are really taking away their ability to conduct these kind of rotational operations, right? It's sort of like having a plant where you say, hey, the plant has 3 8-hour shifts because it runs 24/7, just like nuclear deterrence never takes a day off. And so what they've done is effectively carved out the midnight shift. Now you can either run the plant on a skeleton crew the whole time or have gaps in your coverage, right? But neither is a great option for Vladimir Putin. That's why Trump said this strike was pretty strong. Right? One advisor described the analogy as a chihuahua attacking a much bigger dog. Okay, cool. If that's what you need to get that point across. But here's the problem. Did it result in actually any tangible action for Donald Trump? Well, just yesterday, he had a phone call with Vladimir Putin. Now, you might recall that this is something that the Biden administration avoided doing, right, for reasons that are now very obvious to the public. Now, the Biden administration correctly said that it's unlikely that a phone call with Vladimir Putin would go anywhere, and certainly they wouldn't want to expose the fact that the president was not that cognitively intact. And there were a number of phone calls between the Russian Minister of Defense and the Biden administration Defense Minister, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. There was at least 3 phone calls between those two guys to handle critical deconfliction. But Trump is happy to pick up the phone and dial Vladimir Putin whenever he feels like, which is, again, maybe a better way of doing things, right? Especially when, as discussed, these are people who have nuclear weapons pointed at each other. But what's interesting is, well, troubling, I would say, is that Trump acknowledged President Putin did say, and very strongly, that he will have to respond to the recent attack on airfields. Now, this is interesting because he didn't need to say this to President Trump, right? And Vladimir Putin is a strategic guy. Why would he even say that, right? It doesn't make much tactical sense, because even if you say, why expressly tell Ukraine, hey, we're going to respond, right? Even though you and I could probably predict that's going to happen, you're better off making them sort of guess, right? You want to keep your enemy kind of guessing. So why would you come out and say it? Well, the answer is he was asking for permission, right? He was saying, listen, I think I got to do this thing, right? And what he was really saying is, I'm not asking for permission per se, but if you have concerns, now's the time to raise them. Or if you are going to be forced to take action in response to my response, this is where you tell me about it, right? This would be like saying to your neighbor, listen, hey, I gotta have my roof replaced, and it's going to be loud, and it's going to be inconvenient, and it's going to be annoying, and it's going to drive your dogs and your young kid crazy. So if you got a problem, now's the time to say something. And that's what this is, right? If you have a problem, now's the time to say something. And the fact is that not only did Trump not say anything, but he may not have realized that by pivoting the conversation to Iran and nuclear weapons, it actually looked like he was saying, hey, I'll let you get away with this. I won't say anything, whatever you do, whatever choice you make, because I need your help in this other unrelated matter, right? And that's the thing in international relations. There is no unrelated matter. So President Trump saying, listen, you do what you got to do. We're going to talk about what really matters to me, which is Iran getting nuclear weapons, which is bad. But mostly Iran getting nuclear weapons is a bad thing for the state of Israel. For the United States, Iran's on the other side of the globe. They don't really have ICBMs. Their nuclear existence is bad, but not the end of the world, right? Don't get me wrong. It would destabilize the Middle East in a lot of ways, because it would force the Saudis to have a crash nuclear weapons program. It would force a whole bunch of countries in the region to engage, to start to build their own nuclear arsenal. It's not good, but I would point out that resolving, not resolving the Ukraine conflict, right? But if you're worried about nuclear weapons, well, giving the Ukrainians tools that don't involve kicking out legs of the Russian nuclear triad is probably a good step, right? If your goal is denuclearization of the world, then taking Russia's stable strategic deterrent force, right, and starting to chop at it with an axe is not a great path to nuclear stability, right? Now, Ukraine, I'm not like, oh, Ukraine shouldn't have done this. It's like Ukraine did what was an absolutely logical decision, which is hurt Russia in the most strategic way possible. But this is also the actions that you take when you don't have other better options on the horizon. And that's one of the reasons that the Biden administration chose to continue to provide aid to Ukraine. Not only was it grinding down a U.S. adversary, but it told the Ukrainians, listen, we're going to give you this big carrot of a huge aid package, but you have to play by some rules that we're going to set. And one of those rules that's worth noting that the White House made very clear was do not mess with Russia's nuclear deterrent, right? You might recall 2 years ago, a Ukrainian drone strike actually targeted a Russian long-range radar station. Now, this long-range radar station only has one function, which is to detect the launch of nuclear weapons. And the White House publicly came out and said Ukraine was not supposed to do this. We are not okay with this. And the Ukrainians said, hey, we hear you. We will avoid these kind of targets in the future because we have a stick. We have a carrot in the form of your assistance packages. Without those assistance packages, it's way harder to contain Ukraine. So you see how, again, nothing is ever quite unlinked, if that makes any sense. Now, before we talk about the state of the Russian economy and why some of Russia's most important industries are looking increasingly like they're in crisis, I wanted to mention, of course, if you are a guy and you are busy, right? Maybe you work, you got kids, you're married, dude, it can feel impossible to get it all done. And I get it. I'm putting out content 7 days a week, more than almost any other creator in the space. I run a business and I'm still a dad. I think I'm a good dad. My daughter says I'm the best dad she's got. But I still manage to find the time to train for and run an Ironman. And the reason is because I can really, really be efficient with my schedule. And I have a secret weapon in the form of Strike Gum, right? This was inspired by my time in the military where I needed caffeine and my only options were shitty energy drinks. I made something that's better in every way. This has an energy drink's worth of caffeine in every single piece. 100 milligrams alpha GPC, 0 sugar, right? There's a reason we are the top rated energy gum on Amazon. And if you are interested, you can get some on Amazon Prime or go to strikegum.com. And here's the thing, strikegum.com, you get free shipping on orders over $50 in the United States. But more importantly, right, you can get the subscribe and save because I see the data. Last week, 50% of our orders, 70% of our orders were people who had chewed Strike Gum once and said, I need more of it. So that should tell you right there what kind of product we're selling here. So if you're that guy who's going to reorder, don't rip yourselves off. Get the subscribe and save, right? Look, you get a discount. You can cancel anytime. So why would you not get the cheaper option? It's a no-brainer. So check that out. Also, one other note, we are so close to raising the money for these cars for the 1st Mechanized Battalion of the 24th Brigade. You guys know these cars are the lifeline that provide logistics and CASEVAC for those guys on the front lines. So we want to make sure as many of them get back safely when they're wounded and get the supplies they need, food, water, munitions, and drones. So if you're interested, right, in helping these guys out, not just purchase the vehicles, but also get them up armored in a way that they can be safe, even in the face of a battlefield loaded with fiber optic drones. So if you're interested, the link to that will be in the description as well. I did my part because obviously you guys contributed massively with your support and your reviews, right? Plus you get to add to your collection the patch of the 1st Mechanized Battalion of the 24th Brigade. Remember, it's not just about, to me at least, it's not just about collecting the patches. It's knowing that every one of them represents something that we actually did collectively for these units, right? And that means the world to me. And it means the world to them, literally, right? Some dad is going to get to see his kid because we got them the up armored vehicles they needed. Okay, let's talk about the Russian economy. There's never good news about the Russian economy. Dozens of Russian companies have suspended their dividend payments, basically amid collapsing revenues. Now, here's the thing to remember is according to State Statistics Agency, right, which is going to massage the data to look as good as possible, Russian companies, right, generated collectively a decrease about 30 trillion rubles, about $381 billion in 2024, a 7% decrease. This, once you add in inflation, means that actually, right, remember Russian inflation out of control at 9.4% means that real earnings actually declined by 15%. And as we know, in Russia, the real inflation rate is likely even higher. This is a sort of fake massage inflation rate by the Russian government. So I would say that real earnings are actually declining closer to 20 or 25%. Now, the companies, right, what's interesting what's most interesting is a lot of companies in some key Russian sectors, particularly mining and energy sectors, have announced that they are foregoing dividend payments, like Gazprom, Nordis Nickel, NLMK, and Severstal, right? Are saying, hey, we are not going to be paying dividends in the last quarter of 2024 and the first quarter of 2025, right? And this is what's significant, right? Is that if you're a Russian oligarch, remember, these guys did not acquire these companies. These companies are money factories, right? Literally, you have to be a buffoon to not profitably pull nickel out of a mine and ship it to a processing plant and sell it to them, right? It is an unbelievably simple process. And yeah, obviously, you have to run a mine efficiently is a very, very hard job. But that's the thing. These are state-owned industries. They, by law, do not have competitors. So the pressure is off on these guys. But what that means is that these companies aren't going to be run like American companies. They're not going to be high growth. They're not going to suddenly have their margins dramatically improve because of some new technology that they're working tirelessly to field, right? These oligarchs got these companies at a steal and now are essentially on the payroll of the government, right? Because the government grants them these state mandated monopolies. They run these businesses, more or less regular type, but their benefit is not in the future revenues of the business. It's not like owning Google where you're like, hey, in 6 years, Google might have 100 robo-taxis, 1 million robo-taxis in cities all over the United States. And you go, okay, well, that's where my wealth is going to come from. No, these Russian oligarchs depend on these dividend payments a lot, right? Not entirely. You can still get, for example, loans against the shares, but these dividend payments are so crucial to these Russian oligarchs' wealth because they represent a sustained cash flow. And when you have a sustained cash flow, you can go to a bank and say, listen, I'm going to get a dividend payment from Gazprom because I own a third of it or whatever. And therefore, you should loan me this money because I can make the payments. It's like if you were to sit there and go, hey, I have a trust fund that pays me $500 a month. So I can promise you, for sure that I can pay a $500 a month car loan, right? So you give me that $70,000 car loan so I can buy my big stupid truck. And I can pay it because I literally have the cash to make the payments, right? So it is a key building block of kind of the Russian oligarch wealth network. And so the fact that these are going away is likely infuriating this key class of Russian oligarch. They are likely furious about this, right? Way more than we're appreciating. So again, Russia's economy, as other analysis points out, this is by the Kremlin-linked Center for Macroeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting. So this is a problem that the Russians' own government is saying that there's an increased likelihood of bank runs, an increased likelihood of, there was 3 actual problems, a depositor flight or run on the banks. There's also a Russian firms losing money through these dividends and a slump in growth, right? A 3-tiered sort of hit. And all of these things are likely to have hit, right? They say, right, there's an increased likelihood of what they call a systemic banking crisis in Russia, a run on the banks by depositors, non-performing loans exceeding 10% of total banking assets, right? This would be, again, as we just talked about, the kind of loans these oligarchs hold from Russian banks, right, where they say, yeah, I was going to pay off this loan that I used to buy a mega yacht. I was going to pay it off with the dividend income that I get from my share of Russian nickel. But now I don't have that, so I can't pay these. I can't make the payments on my yacht. This would be an example of these loans exceeding 10% or large-scale banking recapitalizations exceeding 2% of the country's GDP. This is, again, a bank saying, actually, we've run out of money. So they're kind of all like 3 linked events, right? A run on the bank would happen if you believe your bank doesn't have money. And the only way to avoid that would be to inject huge amounts of money into the bank, which would be its own crisis because, again, Russia needs that money to fund its war machine. So you could see that this is collectively a problem that even Kremlin-linked companies are admitting. This is, by the way, what's crazy is that this is a state enterprise. So this is actually saying this is coming from the Russian government. This is the rosiest, most optimistic version of this, which is saying, well, it could happen, but it hasn't happened yet, which implies that it probably, at least one of those three, is probably already happened. My guess is non-performing loans, because we would know if Russia had to recapitalize its banks, right? But that doesn't mean that the Russian war machine isn't ramping up its own efforts. What's worth pointing out is that, first off, you see more and more Russia's spies pretend to be Ukraine's FBI, luring citizens into acts of sabotage, right? Russian spies pretend to be these SBU officers or FBI officers, send fake summons, and trick elderly Ukrainians into carrying out sabotage disguised as activities of the state. This is interesting because this is almost a militarized version of an existing scam, right? So instead of your grandma getting a call from someone pretending to be a detective saying, we have your grandson here, and if you don't pay us bail in Fortnite gift cards, your son's gonna go to super prison. And she goes, oh no, not super prison. I'll get the Fortnite gift cards, right? And next thing you know, grandma spent her life savings on V-Bucks that has been wired to a scammer in Moscow, right? Well, now they've just taken that and just sort of mixed it up a little bit. So instead of calling grandma and saying, we got your kid here, and if you don't pay us the V-Bucks, all hell's going to break loose, right? Instead, they say, this is the Ukrainian FBI, and we think some Russians are targeting your son. And if you want to help him, you're going to plant this, instead of buying gift cards with V-Bucks, we just need you to put this suitcase under this car where one of our agents will pick it up. But it's not. It's a bomb, right? So this kind of Russian false flag tactics is almost like again, fascinating because it is taking a tried and true scam that you typically is used to extract money, and now is used to do things like surveil individuals, transport items from one location to another, transfer money to an unfamiliar bank card to donate to the armed forces of Ukraine, right? Again, purchasing chemical components and assembling an explosive device, setting fire to vehicles and administrative buildings, and committing acts of sabotage. Okay, sometimes these last two, well, you never know, right? Somebody could be told, oh, actually, we need you to set this vehicle on fire because we think the person in it is a Russian spy. But in fact, you are the Russian spy. It also includes installing malware on phones to allow remote surveillance of the device. And they're focusing on, of course, elderly Ukrainians who just don't have quite the sophistication to know that the FBI is not going to call you and say, hey, I need you to put some spyware on your cousin's phone, right? And this is, of course, the SBU reminds everyone that, hey, we operate within the framework of Ukrainian law. Genuine SBU officers do not demand that you install third-party software, do not give you sketchy random tasks, and do not use unofficial channels of communication. So, the grandma scam getting worse. Imagine a world where grandmas are employed en masse by AI-powered scammers to commit acts of sabotage against the U.S. military. That would be a truly insane, bizarro world. But that's not the only bizarro world. We also have former Russian General Sergei Shoigu and Kim Jong-un having a besties meeting. Look at his cool office, by the way. That's sick. Right, North Korea has become one of Moscow's main allies during Ukraine's offensive, and North Korea wants everyone to know he is not mad about all those casualties. In fact, the casualties they've taken is merely a rounding error, right? Kim Jong-un said, we will unconditionally support Russia in its war in Ukraine and expects Moscow to emerge victorious, guys. Which is fascinating because, again, as we point out, the Russian war machine has carved out a lot of North Korea's munitions for use in Ukraine. But the fact is that it's unclear what percentage of North Korea's munitions they have actually gotten their hands on, right? So if North Korea may have lost a lot in terms of artillery deterrent force, but they may have gained in terms of getting access to sophisticated Russian technology. And it's almost kind of weird that this has to be done. It implies that there's some reason those two sides might be mad at each other, that they have to meet, shake hands, release a statement and saying we love each other so much, right? It's sort of like It's like when your neighbor, I don't know why I'm using a bunch of neighbor analogies, but it's like when your neighbor starts posting on Facebook how much she loves their husband apropos of nothing. You're like, oh, wow, they're either having marital problems or she cheated on him and is just coping with it. But I wonder if it's related to the failed launch of a North Korean frigate. And it's possible that that frigate included some level of rocket or missile technology provided by Russia. And maybe analysts are saying, hey, we think Russia may have not done a great job helping them build this frigate, right? Or it could literally be the scale of North Korean losses is becoming more public. And North Korea just wants people to know, listen, we don't give a shit about those dead North Koreans. We are not the United States. We don't give a fuck what happens to our citizens. We do way worse to our own citizens. But you also have Russia admitting openly, yeah, we kidnapped all those Ukrainian children. You might be like, what? Kidnapping Ukrainian children? Yeah, this has been actually an extreme sore point for Ukraine, because what happens is in the occupied regions, in a lot of cases, children's parents are either killed or are not available for one reason or another to watch their kids, right? They're killed, they're injured, they're off fighting. And if those kids don't have anyone to care for them, or they're not in the care of other family members, and oftentimes if the parents aren't literally actively present, what the Russian state has actually begun doing is actually adopting them out, despite them having family that is willing to take them. But they're crucially adopting them out to Russian families and essentially raising them in Russian culture, right? So imagine, for example, if you have children, if you and your spouse were to die, instead of going to be raised by a sibling, one of your siblings or your parents, your kid was taken by China and raised to be a staunch Chinese Communist Party supporter and a hater of the United States. You'd be like, hey man, loving my country is a core part of who I am, and that was important to me to instill in my children. It's a little ghoulish to sit there and say, yeah, this important part of your own identity, we're going to erase that out from existence. And we're going to erase your existence from your children's knowledge, right? Again, some of these kids actually do have parents. So the fact that Russia is even just out admitting that this is a thing that they do is, again, pretty ghoulish, but also part of a larger campaign of Russification, because what Russia's real long-term plan is, and Putin thinks in these kinds of terms, is to take those kids and then be like, hey, you're from these occupied regions of Ukraine, so we're going to put you there, but your loyalty to Russia is so great that we are Russifying this region, right? You are going to identify as Russian, you're going to believe you are Russian, and you are going to live in occupied Ukraine, meaning that if for any reason the Ukrainians were to take back that territory, they would take back a territory chock full of Russian loyalists. Anyway, guys, huge thank you to our Colonel tier members like Thomas Anderson, Dan Cochran, Jalen Gow, We Got It Fixed, Officer Murley, Deborah Oppenheimer, Paul JW, Jeff Davies, Mike 54, and Serene Margaret and the GMAT Club. Plus all of our Lieutenant tier members. I couldn't do it without you guys. I hope you guys liked today's videos. Taking a look at some crazy fiber optic drone maneuvers. If you're interested, combatvetnews.com is the place. See you guys. Cheers.